Sharon. Just give me a second. Oh, sorry, let me try that again. I need to share sound. There we go. Okay, cool. Welcome everybody to our quarterly hug that's geared around shielding your CRM. We're going to be talking about the state of CRM in 2025, understanding the security foundations, user permissions, data and integrity controls, integrations and APIs, governance, and then data backups and recovery. And then we've created a nice little security checklist for everyone to take away and to go check that their portals are safe and secure, and then Q&A at the end. Admittedly, I did, to manage my time, record some videos. So we're going to let them play through. And like Sharon said, please engage in the chat, ask questions as we go along. Okay, so this old picture of me, but I'm Marlene Oosthuizen. In case you don't know me, I work at Spitfire Inbound. I'm a lead solutions architect and a proud HubSpot community member. And I put a few of my stats there from the community. If you're not in the community already, please join. It is a great space where like-minded individuals share ideas and engage around relevant topics. Okay, cool. So looking at the state of CRM, we are seeing use cases that HubSpot, is no longer just a departmental tool. It is essentially the hub or central nervous system of operations in many cases. A lot of customers are bringing in financial data with the advancements coming into integrations and so on. And we have the AI boom going around across many software systems, as we all know. Having said that, and due to the fact that AI is incredibly reliant on data, everybody is after your data, right? And we all play a role to protect our CRMs and the data that we house on behalf of our customers or our customers. And so the more important your CRM is, the more likely it is to be sought after by malicious attackers and so on. Okay, so I've included a cool couple of stats, and I think the main takeaways here is that with the advancements and data coming into the system, a lot of organizations are reliant on the uptime of these systems. And so it has a detrimental effect when the systems go down or there's a breach or anything's compromised. It has an operational effect, a financial effect on businesses, and so on. And 82% of RevOps leaders today are saying that permission governance and users are the biggest risk to them at the moment. Okay. Just a couple of things to think about. Like I mentioned, if your CRM is compromised, so is your team. Everybody in the business feels it. Okay. A single workflow can impact journeys. So think about workflows, automations, all of that has an impact. It's not just a business affected, but your reputation is also affected. Okay. As things grow and evolve, obviously more people we add to the system, the more risks there are as well. And then lastly, just taking away that security reviews are mission critical. They should form part of your business processes and reporting on a monthly basis or even weekly depending on how many users you have in your system. Okay, so key takeaway, the bottom line is the more powerful your system, the more important it is to protect. Okay, so we're going to go into the overview of HubSpot's fundamental foundations that they have in place to keep the portal secure. Luckily for us, everything is managed by HubSpot, and they have support teams looking at all of the critical functions that we rely on heavily. And we'll look at those core elements in the next slide. Okay, so having a hublet within the AWS environment means that our data is encrypted. HubSpot does have a SOC 2 certification, and they are HIPAA compliant, as well as GDPR and CCPA compliant. They have a secure infrastructure with failover in place, and they have a team that's actively monitoring the environments. If you are registered and subscribed on the trust page, which you can access after we've sent this to you, you will get notified of any incidents. And you can then also subscribe and follow if it's in relation to you. Most of the time, HubSpot resolves those incidents quite quickly because due to their SLAs. But I highly recommend that if you're not already subscribed, to please subscribe, and then also refer to your IT departments or so on to also monitor this. Okay, identity and access management. HubSpot has made some updates on the authentication controls, which we'll cover in more detail. Having 2FA, mandatory for admins, and then highly recommended for everybody else to implement as well. And then there's SSO, which I'm happy to announce that is now available on a pro level as well. So everybody can get that enterprise grade security. And then we can even limit people logging into from specific IP addresses. Okay, then we have more granular permission and team access levels. We've got individual controls. We've got permission sets. We've got team hierarchy and nested groups that we can specify. And obviously, on an individual level, you can specify down to the record and property who, from an individual level, can edit any of those elements, as well as team sessions. Exciting for the marketing people, you can control some of your assets. So you could limit access to dashboards, workflows, list campaigns, and file manager assets so that people don't incorrectly swap out a brochure or downloadable ebook, for example. And more than that, you can include approval lines on your emails, landing pages, and blogs and website pages as well. Okay. From a data protection point of view, we are able to track logins. We can monitor exports. You can limit who can import and export data. And you also have field level changes. So we can monitor who has updated a particular property if there are multiple people that have access to edit that. And we can actually look through the history of that and see how data has changed as well. And then, of course, very important, we have the subscription management and the cookie tracking controls in place as well. From a data governance point of view, we have the ability to do backups. HubSpot does do automatic backups. Terms and conditions apply. I've added a little T and C's there. It's your responsibility to manage your own backup instance, but HubSpot does do some disaster recovery elements from an operational point of view. So in some scenarios, they can assist, but it's always just best practice, since you're responsible for the data on your platform, that you take that onus upon yourself and or relevant individual like your data protection officer. Looking at the restoration options, we'll go through that in a second. And yeah, lastly, looking at the application and integration security, there's been a lot of updates. If you have integrations, custom integrations, there's been a lot of updates in terms of the APIs and endpoints. And so we've got our private app tokens now. We're able to rotate those token keys and secrets. HubSpot vets all of their applications. You need to go through a rigorous process and meet their security standards before any third-party or HubSpot partner apps get placed in the marketplace. There's rate limiting that you can specify on a webhook from an application point of view. And yeah, we have an overview, which will also cover as to how do you gauge the health of your integration. So now getting into the finer details, I'm going to open up this video and you will confirm, Shiran, if you can hear me when I play this.
See how many users have been enrolled into.
Ooh, let me just take it back.
Yes, the sound is fine, Marlene.
When it comes to user permissions, all you have to do is go through to the settings tab, go to users and teams, and ultimately, this is your dashboard. If you have a super admin assigned or a HubSpot champion who manages access, they would be familiar with this. Within the user section, you have a view of your recent users, inactive users, deactivated users, users that are still pending, invite bounce. This typically is where your Mimecast would or similar would block incoming emails, in which case you need to whitelist the email IPs and domains. You can also see how many users have been enrolled into FA. So scrolling down further, another thing that you can add to your view and columns is to add in additional information. So users can add their languages, additional languages that they can speak, phone numbers, first name, last name, and then their time zone, etc., availability status if they work within the service app. And then if you hit apply, it would then essentially become available for you to view here against the users. So this is a nice way for us to see if a calendar has been updated or connected. The email status, this of course is disabled due to the demo portal, but ideally when you're engaging with customers, these should be green and connected. And this is a nice way to also monitor whether or not your sales team activities are actually tracking. Okay, so that's the overview on the user.
Sorry, is the speed okay, Shiran? Is it too fast?
I think it's fine for me, but potentially we can slow it down a little bit.
I think slow it down a little bit, please.
Okay.
I just want to run through seats. So looking at seats, if you have these enabled, and depending on your plan, you can allocate it accordingly. You can see what individuals are on, as well as their permission sets, which we'll look into next. Okay, before we hit there, just talking about teams quickly. So within a team, you can configure a main team, and you can nest teams within those teams. So for example, we could nest this low permission team within the Spitfire team, and this is for cross collaboration and ensuring that people can see the same data. For example, if I was dealing with South African data and Shiran with UK data, and we both needed to see it, we would allocate the records to a particular team, and we would both then be able to see it. Okay, so presets and permission sets. Permission sets are very cool because essentially you configure a single permission set and maintain that rather than an individual permission set. So for example, if we go under Spitfire user, you'll see that we have 6 super admins, but 46 Spitfire users who then have access to services, contacts, our account reports, sales, and marketing, whereas the super admin obviously can view everything across the board. And these permission sets are very useful for organizations who have a lot of permission management that come into play. When it comes to presets, this is configurable notifications that you can also set up on behalf of your team. For example, you would specify the default homepage. So if you wanted someone in the marketing team, for example, to go straight to the ads, they would see a specific dashboard. What is their date and time number format? Email signatures can be set up and controlled, and email tokens as well. And then from a notification point of view, you can also configure this and add to it. So I know often when you connect some email accounts, it would into your help desk and so on, it would off of the first registration and incoming contacts, send a notification to all the super admins. That is a preset that you could configure to limit individuals getting notified about everything. These are granular level permissions and management activities that have been developed over time and is now available as a feature. Going back to users and permission sets, I just want to mention the fact that with HubSpot rolling out additional updates, I'm going to just pick on Array for this instance, but when it comes to additional information and products that HubSpot launches and betas and new features, I would want to just let you guys know that we need to come back, and I would highly recommend that we look at this on a monthly basis, that someone get allocated the responsibility to ensure that on a preset level or user access level, that you monitor where the functionality information has come in. For example, when HubSpot has rolled out HubSpot credits, the utilization and usage on credits are enabled down on an AI and agent level. So it's very important to go and look at those elements and see, for argument's sake, whether those elements are actually on. So if you're using presets to control, you would obviously connect it there. But if you are on a legacy portal and haven't used any of the presets before, please do see if you are able to, and then configure it accordingly. And then specifically looking at the agent side of things. So when we look at pre's, you can see you can actually enable that preset and say, okay, this individual can have access to pre's. This can access the customer agent, and so on and so forth. And you would have to go through these and see where HubSpot has nested the functionality against the permissions, because you wouldn't want someone to then have access to a particular feature that then partakes in your credit-based consumption that then has a monetary impact. So there is the AI element strategy to also consider when it comes to the general permissions.
Okay, wow. I do realize that I do jump around quite a lot, so I do apologize for the next upcoming videos. I will be better. Okay, looking at the data quality and integrity controls from an integration point of view, we're going to focus on the data studio elements here.
Looking at the data quality tab in the module section, we see an overview of issues that we have within the system. Now, it's important to note that not one singular person can come in here without understanding the data model, the implications of the data, and issues that are essentially allowed within the CRM. These are typically what we would look at from a best practice point of view, but there would be extenuating circumstances in some scenarios where there would be duplicates. For example, if you find individuals sharing an email address and they're a sales team, and yes, it's 2025 and this still happens, but if we wanted people to receive multiple marketing emails, for example, or whatever the scenario use case is for having this shared email box, one would actually have a contact to contact relationship with a singular email on one object, but then use that data to potentially track two different deals against a singular email, but have two different contact records with varying names and surnames. This will then flag as a duplicate, but given the circumstances, we know it is not. So I think just looking at this contextually is great, but thinking about your portal and the scenarios and then considering and looking at that, yes, then you can drive an action plan with regards to the quality. This is great from a picking up formatting issues from a data quality point of view. It also highlights some of the areas for focus and where the enhancements can be done. So one of the core things from a formatting issue point of view, again, just highlighting the fact that we can turn on these pre-configured automations. But more than that, we can easily also have an overview and see what our portal is looking like. At Spitfire, we always recommend building a hygiene dashboard, but the core takeaway here on the data quality side for me is the fact that they've highlighted apps that need to be reconnected to bring data in. So if we look at the app syncs, which allows you to see from a data sync point of view the quality and what needs to be reactivated and resynced, you would then obviously look at that. From a point of view to see what is currently active, we can drill down what's still processing. These are for your native application, but more than that, we can also then look into the actual developmental area where we want to see the monitoring statuses and our API call usages, which we will cover in more detail in a second. But essentially, the old adage applies: garbage in, garbage out. It's important to appoint someone to look at the data sync and ensure that the information is pulling through accordingly.
Okay. On the integration and API security side of things, I think for this one, this is really exciting. This is a core area that people often forget to look into. But it is something that HubSpot has invested quite a bit of development into. As you can see, it has its whole own section here. Legacy apps have been nested into its own space. They are still available within the integration section, which again I cover in the video. But in this section here, going more into details about how to interrogate the data, the API calls, usage and so on. Okay.
Mostly with the private app and tokens. We have, from an app point of view,
Sorry.
this video, I highlighted the fact that we now have the development module available on the left sidebar, and that we now can monitor API call logs, specifically when we want to look at integration stuff over here. I want to just spend some time to talk about the fact that we now integrate mostly with the private app and tokens. We have, from an app point of view, gotten major updates where it's very easy from our side to swap out tokens from a security point of view, change them. We have a much more focused CRM security point of view. We have secrets available, and we can control the scope of the elements when we talk about private apps and what it has access to when sharing the tokens. We can control down to the detail as to what schema can be accessed and whether the permissions have read and write abilities. Obviously, if you're in the development space and dealing with security, this is very important to get the scope correct. You wouldn't want to give an application full access to your environment when it's not warranted. So establishing the scope of the application is critically important. As you can see in this example, this particular app can access tickets. It can read the deal schema. It can write to the deal schema. It can read and write to the deal splits, and it can also read CRM object owners and the deals, and then of course write to the deals. So in this scenario, this application can read and write and update back and forth depending on the data and use case. Within the logs, you can see whether you want to look at the get and post methods, see what has been patched or deleted. And if there were webhooks here, you would adjust the events here and ensure that in this application, the webhooks used would pull through here and show whether or not it's also successful. To edit an app, you just go in, click edit. To redefine the scope, you would add in. To remove the scope and adjust it, you can then see also there's a little summary if you're not able to read the scope. And then if there are any webhook changes, like I said, you can manage the load balancing and throttling here, which is also something to consider within the development and security space, because you wouldn't want an application to be overloaded because there's too much data being passed to and fro. So just looking at the applications and knowing what they're about is very important. I've seen some portals where the applications don't actually have a description. And so anybody looking at the apps or going in blind without the context don't often know what the applications are in relation to. So just focusing on this is important. You can see, typically would start with looking at the apps, which ones were created a long time ago, and work your way back to the newer apps and look at the scopes and just circumvent the CRM from not putting any data out of the system that hasn't been authorized, and make sure that your IT department is aware of the fact that there's data This has implications on your legal and finance areas within the business potentially. In the event of a breach or something of that sort, you do need to have this backup and policies in place, and documentation of most of your systems that you're using within the business, because the wrong scope within the wrong hands can be detrimental. We have access keys, important to note as well. And then, of course, we have our testing accounts, whereby we can then test applications, do penetration tests on applications, and then ultimately bring it into production if we needed to from a security point of view. Just circling back to the setting side where integrations used to live, they do still live here. I just want to point out that while I've shown you the development side on the left pane, there is a section for the legacy apps still that you can navigate to. You'll see that it takes you to the same window. But just going back there, if you wanted to look at the native applications, which typically are your calendar integrations, MailChimp applications, your normal kinds like Canva, etc., will start to live here. And you'll notice that the private apps are also pulling through with the native apps. And so looking at these applications, you can see the overall summary. You can see which apps need attention and what upgrades are available. We also have the certifications here from the HubSpot Academy, and at the bottom here you get recommendations for your portal as to what industries similar to yours have installed other apps. So you can see there's been a bunch of activities. You can drill down and see who has changed settings by user and by what application.
Okay, so towards the end, I had forgotten to speak, but you are able to configure notifications to let you know when somebody has installed a new app within the CRM. I highly recommend that that gets done as part of the setup. It is important so we know that what data has the possibility to move into and out of the actual accounts. Okay. Portal monitoring and governance. I want to pause here for a moment for us to just think about the fact that there are advancements in the world, and AI is beautiful, but it is also incredibly dangerous when in the wrong hands. I was at some courses recently with AI about digital transformation, where we saw applications spinning up and recreating like for like websites that match to the T. Obviously, the domain won't be configurable, but people rarely read URLs. And so imagine someone spinning up a very real looking with a very similar login page as HubSpot. They get a phishing mail. That's always been a vulnerability, except now you think you're headed to that landing page. You input your very own details, and that session token gets taken, and then there's access granted. That intercepted individual will then be able to access everything depending on your permission. If you're a super admin, for example, have access to that whole database. This is a very real phishing attack, or I'm calling it a phishing attack. I'm also not an expert, but this is very scary. The MFA then doesn't matter at all. This person will have access to almost everything that you have access to on your device. So, and system, depending on what the actual attack and intention is of that individual. So that's just something to take away with and keep in mind out there, because it does have an impact. And so this brings me on to the next area where HubSpot has started implementing changes to circumvent attacks like I just explained that people are actually falling for. Okay, so without further ado, these are the latest updates on a logging mechanism point of view.
So the security section within the settings has gotten a facelift, which I'm happy to report. So if we go again into settings and you go drill down to security, you'll notice that the login page has changed quite significantly. Firstly, you can now enable SSO on Pro and Enterprise accounts. And this is a very needed security feature that previously was only available on Enterprise. What they've now even further enabled was the allowed login methods. So if we look into this, you can turn this section on. If you have stringent governance policies whereby it is strictly SSO, you would configure the SSO setup through your Active Directory and work with your IT department to get that enabled throughout the business. And then people would just log in through their normal mechanics. But then in this event, if you wanted to allow people to do a Google login, that is an alternative setup as specified here in conjunction that the SSO needs to be set up. It's either or. So you need to just obviously check with your IT department as to how they need to configure that. Okay, in our scenario, we are required to use the Google login. You can also exempt users. So typically exempted users, if you don't have people in your environment and an agency is coming in like a one-off to come and do a job, or a development company or a developer, they would come in, be added to HubSpot. And if you so use this login methods, the individual would then be exempted if you do not want to add them to your environment as a user and so on. Okay, highly recommend that all super admins enable 2FA and that it is enabled across the board. It is something I recommend that people monitor to see if they are logging in with the 2FA. You can then also specify which method from a 2FA you want to enable. So previously this wasn't possible. We could only do it through a text message. It is great to see that we can now also do it through authenticator apps as well as through the mobile app to enable that. You can also restrict users and enforce a timeout length to log people out after not having any activity within the environment. And you can also restrict IP addresses. So if you didn't want people accessing your system remotely, and if your governance and business processes are informed by various other departments, and whether or not you want to restrict IP logins, you are able to. And you are then further able to allow or disallow HubSpot and their employees and service agents to access your portal. Typically, they would never access your account without approval and authorization. And even when you do log a ticket, they do actually ask you if the setting is not configured to have that validated. You'll note that there is also now a history of access available, which is very cool to see as well, just for an additional audit log and additional governance. Okay. Then on the permission side of the security, we love this dashboard for a few reasons. This is great to look at on a monthly or weekly basis, just to see what your account status is essentially. Obviously, there's green tick boxes if HubSpot deems it good, but if there's a focus area, you would need to look at that. And what is happening here in this scenario is this is flagging that there are partner users with super admin access. Now, if you have an agency working in your HubSpot account and they are having a partner seat, in some instances, they may be a super admin. In some instances, their permissions might be locked down a little bit lower. In this regard, this is our demo portal. So this, again, in context makes sense. So this is not an action we need to take. But as always, having limited super admin access across your account is critical for the event of a vulnerability or breach. Depending on the device and how things are set up, I mean, if a device gets stolen, but there's no password on it, and then there's SSO enabled, anybody could essentially access an account. So the permission levels from your entire security protocol and policy and infrastructure comes into play at a bigger point in time when looking at all of these security features and elements. Okay, then further to that, you can see there are recommendations to look at critical permissions. Again, this is something you can review. So you can drill down into critical permissions and see, okay, who has setting access? Okay, so these two individuals. This one was me a while back. Okay, so I have the ability to actually update contacts, modify billing, etc. So in this regard, we can actually change this and remove the permissions in one go. So again, this is great to do an update as opposed to adjusting a permission set or an individual permission. So I would start off by looking at the security side of things, permissions here, and then drilling down back into the other elements within the access on an individual basis. But this is a great place to start to get your account set up securely.
Okay. So for this instance, I am not going to actually play a video and I'll jump right into the demo. I'm just going to close the screen and then go into our demo portal. So for the backup and restore element, which is what I was going to cover, there are new updates from a restoration point of view. So you would see that I have previously configured a restoration point, but I'm going to go back and undo it. Okay, so if you create a restoration point in time, so like let's choose now, you can specify and select what object you want to actually create a specific point in time for this restoration point. So I'm just gonna give that a description, and then it's going to process, and I'm not going to install and restore the changes because it affects to those particular objects that I've just selected. Another cool update is you can now schedule backups. So as you can see, I have enabled a backup that's scheduled to happen in the form of an export. It does come as a email delivery or delivery email that you need to download that subset of data onto your machine. So I highly recommend that you allocate this function to somebody within the business that is allowed to host that data. So it will be going onto a device, preferably hosted in a cloud in your own environment, and then should be ideally discarded, unless, of course, your governance protocols define anything otherwise. Okay, so from a backup restoration point of view, that is the process. Looking back into the privacy and consent side of things, where we have more data to look at. So first and foremost, obviously looking at your data privacy settings, that's still relevant, and everything is configured the way that it should be is really important. Making sure that you have your policies on your website and that it matches your current processes. I think a lot of times privacy policies are written, and because it's just essentially a button on a banner on a website, it often doesn't get looked at. So I do recommend that those get reviewed as well. From a data privacy request point of view, there's been recent updates also to the POPI Act where you do need to have this in place. This data privacy request page should be there in place for an individual to request the information that you house about them in the system, because that is a consumer right. And so you would absolutely need to have that in place. Once that is enabled, and somebody does actually request to have their data removed from your system, you are able to actually see that from a dashboard. Again, this is something somebody needs to actively look at. There are notifications that can be set up. You do actually specify a person responsible for this. In this scenario, it's Sharon. And you can see that there was a data deletion request way back in February with the due date to have that information discarded by the 13th. What then happens is the contact then receives a transactional email that confirms that the data has been discarded from HubSpot securely. Another last element that I do actually want to point out, going back to the setup of this, right towards the end of the privacy tools, there's the sensitive data protection. So if you are in an organization that's housing personal data, such as credit card information, ID numbers, VIN numbers, driver's licenses, financial information, health, medical data, you would need to specify this. And once configured, you would then essentially need to reallocate properties. So for example, what happens in the credit card instance is the numbers get masked on a property level. So once the sensitive data is protected, you would need to go and create a new property, indicate that it's a sensitive data property, and that information gets masked. It can still be used for record purposes, etc., except the protection here is on a user level layer that the consumer is not at risk by employees of the business in the system. And so that is critical. I mean, if we were malicious individuals, which we absolutely are not, obviously, but they do exist, this gives that you as a business that surety that you are protecting the data. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. Ooh, sorry, let me reshare just to show you that we have a checklist. And I'm going to stop here for any questions.
Sorry, Marlene, will you go back and just show the
Yeah.
check again?
Oh, apologies.
Marlene, I think what would be quite nice to know as well is specifically on this checklist, are there any things that are limited to enterprise only? Or can you do some variation of this with other tiers on the portal?
So I think there are some variations, but there is also quite a bit of updates happening to some of the accounts over time, and enhancements that needs to happen. So for example, SSO being rolled down to lower tiers is something that's needed for more organizations. And so I do see that there's going to be some developmental areas, which is why I've suggested also people follow in the community, certain threads, ideas, topics, all of that. To know the core differences in terms of functionality, you would need to review your HubSpot plans accordingly. As everybody knows, HubSpot is literally updating and rolling out releases every day. And so this is why this is a large focus and should be owned by a singular person to make sure that they do review this. So if there are changes, that you can manage it accordingly.
Great. I have a couple of questions. I don't see any in the chat, guys. Please
Okay.
add them. But with the move over from the ability to choose login information, so the screen that you showed us where it had login with Google, login. If we decide, a client decides to make that change and go, okay, from now on, we're going to force everyone to log in with Google. What should the teams know before they implement that? Is it going to log them all out? Do they need to, what are the ramifications of doing that?
Yeah, so we had that scenario, as you know, when we made that change. It did reboot the current sessions with the users, but because we knew the environment, we knew we were Google, we knew that that particular portal, when we enabled it, didn't have a major effect. We were not affected, and that change was easy, and everybody just had to log in. I think it's detrimental for an admin to make such a change without knowing their business's setup. So, and obviously, you can't go and configure Microsoft login if you're a Google house and vice versa. I also do think you'll have some challenges if you use both environments. So wherever your email is hosted, use that one. I know the passkeys are great. So if you can enable passkeys, that's much more secure than 2FA even. Although 2FA is a standard, like I've emphasized, passkey is definitely the way to go. Anything else, Shiran?
No, I think it's a lot of information. I think with the sensitive data fields, I think that a lot of people are not actually aware that HubSpot rolled out the sensitive data options. And I think, from that side, it's important, like you said, to go, what data constitutes sensitive data. And as you saw when you did the demo of the backup includes that sensitive data information. So like you said, storing that information is quite critical. What I wanted to ask about that is, do you advise that everybody does a data backup of their HubSpot instance? And if so, like how often, kind of thing?
I do think that someone should make a backup because, like I've mentioned, while HubSpot does do backups from a maintainability point of view, again, it's not all of the objects, and it's not all of the data, and it's not every instance that they can roll back. So again, because people managing their HubSpot accounts, the onus does reside on them to maintain and host the data. I would highly recommend that everybody do a backup at least once a month. While everything is HubSpot specifically as a 99.99% uptime, we have seen AWS, Cloudflare, and many other services go down in a couple of in the last couple of weeks. And so I just think from a best practice point of view, but not everybody, right? It should be a person that takes the ownership responsibility, pointing back to the IT department or relevant data protection officer to take that responsibility, because in the bigger scheme of things, that onus resides with those people and individuals, and they know best practice and business policy, how they should manage the data. And it depends business to business.
Great, thank you. Does anybody else? We've got about 2 minutes left. Are there any other questions that anybody would like? You can pop them in the chat if you want. Otherwise, I think we are at the end of our session for today. So thank you so much, Marlene, for your time and for taking us through a very key part of managing your HubSpot instance. We will send out the recording as well as the slides with links to all the videos in that you can look at in your own time. And as always, if you do have any questions, please reach out to Spitfire. Thank you all for joining us today, and have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye.
Thank you.